All right, so we have another bread recipe coming. This is going to be an all white flour sourdough recipe. And so you'll get to see all that. Let's get started. I did a time-lapse shot of my starter overnight to see what time it was when it doubled. All right, continuing to try this. I'm going to try a float test on this starter. You can see there's a lot of bubbles in this starter, popping. So it's still really active, even though it was sort of on the decline when I picked it up this morning. So I'm going to try the float test, which is really just where you see if your starter will float, with the idea that a starter that floats has enough gas in it to make bread. So this starter does actually float. So this could be bread right here. I think it might be later today because I have a good bit of it. All right, that's kind of making a mess. That's what we know is next for this. This is a bread recipe I've done a number of times, so I'm gonna do it again. It's off a website. Like anything else, there's as many sourdough bread recipes as there are stars in the sky, it seems. This is one that I've done a few times with the idea that if you do something several times, you get better and better at it. So I've been working on this one a little bit. So we're gonna start, this recipe wants to start with 60 grams of leaven. So here's my starter. So I've got 0 on my scale, and I'm actually doubling this. So I'm going with 120 grams of this. There's 108. There's 121. Look at that, like magic. All right, there's the leaven. And then it wants 600 grams of tepid water, which I have here pre-measured out. So bring that in. And then this is one of those many sourdough recipes that encourages you to use your hands for everything. So I have washed my hands, so for those of you who are concerned. And now I'm just dissolving the starter in this water. Now here's the thing I'll tell you. So this is a starter I haven't used before. This is a starter given to me by a friend. It is an all white flour starter, which I don't have. My other starters, I have 2, by the way, total of 4 starters, but 2 others that are both whole wheat. So this one was bubbly at a time that I didn't expect it to be. So we'll see what that gets us. So that's dissolved in there. I'm gonna move the salt out of the way because we don't need that just yet. And now I'm going to add what looks like 390 times 2, which is 780 grams of bread flour. This is white, unbleached bread flour. So I'm just gonna make a whole bunch of that. 400, 600, what did I say? 780. This is a lot of bread flour. Both of these loaves are giveaways. There's 784. I'm gonna let that be my number. And then to start, let me get my scale out of the way. And I like to mix on top of a little mat. So this is just getting this kind of all incorporated. I'm not adding the salt yet. There are different recipes that tell you different things. Some will say, get the salt in there right away. Some will say, wait on the salt. This is a wait on the salt recipe. So just kind of mixing this with my hands. And it is, again, for the ones who tell you to use your hands, none of them tell you to use 2 hands. My last bread video, I actually used both hands and it was very, very messy. So all you're looking to do in this first step is get all the dry flour incorporated roughly. So this is the shaggy mass state of this dough, and it's gonna sit for a while and just absorb the flour, well, for about a half an hour. So I'll come back to this in about a half an hour, and that's it, man. That is step 1, ready to go. Get the worst of this off my hands, and then I will wash my hands, cover this, and I will be back in about a half hour, and we'll go from there. All right, we are back. The dough has been hydrating for, I said 20 minutes. It's actually been here for about an hour because I had a couple meetings, which is totally fine. So we're now gonna add salt. So what happened first is the dough kind of gets a chance to hydrate all the, the water gets a chance to hydrate all the flour. before the salt gets added, and apparently that's a good thing. So we are, again, doing a double batch of this. Each loaf gets 8 grams of salt, so total of 16 grams coming in right here in my handy scale. It always seems like more salt than it should be, but if you've ever made a loaf of bread, that's 17, which is not a problem, without salt in it, it's a bad thing. So just sprinkle the salt across the top, and then throughout the rest of this process, you'll see that I'm actually getting my hand wet rather than using extra flour. So what we're doing here is just kind of mixing all this salt in. Gonna do it again with my hand, and keeping a little bit of water on my hand keeps the dough from sticking. And I don't know if you looked closely before, but even after sitting for a while, this dough has a really different look and feel to it. Just kind of continuing with water here. Really different look and feel to it than it did when I first started mixing it up. It's more dough-like. It's got more spring to it. It's smoother, a little silkier, whatever all the other words are for when things are not rough. So the step here is just to continue kind of working that salt in and getting it dissolved. That's another good reason to get a little bit of water on your hands. Sourdough dough, it seems repetitive, is also a really sticky dough. So I've been playing with sourdough now for about, 5 months and learning about it. And actually look at that. The fact that, see how that stretches? That's the beginning of gluten development. That's super dope in sourdough land. So all good news there. So just continuing to make this so that the salt is completely mixed in. Pick up all the wet stuff across the side if we can. And this is now ready to start what's called a stretch and fold. So this now is going to spend much of the rest of the day covered with this towel. It will be in the oven with the light on, but no other heat. I keep my house pretty cold, and so it just kind of helps the dough begin its ferment. So it's going to spend time in the oven with the light on. That'll help the temperature in there become a little bit warmer. And then every more or less 45 minutes, I will come out and I will show you and do what's called a stretch and fold. It's just a process of kind of folding the dough over itself. It really kind of takes the place of kneading in a dough like this. So that's what's happening now. I'll see you back here in 45 minutes. Alexa, set a bread timer for 45 minutes.
Bread timer, 45 minutes, starting now.
She continues to be my baking assistant. See you shortly. All right, we are at stretch and fold number 1. The dough doesn't look a whole lot different from last time, which makes sense. So same thing, gonna get my hand wet. And then the process here is just kind of get your hand underneath, give it a little stretch, fold it over, all the way around until you do the whole thing. Get your hand underneath it, give it a little stretch, fold it over. You don't wanna stretch it so far that it breaks, because again, we are in pursuit of strengthening the gluten here. So do about 4 or 5 of those stretches until you've covered the whole dough, and then cover it back up. We'll be back in 45 minutes to do it again. So stretching and folding is not all that interesting, so I thought I would just speed through this part. What you'll notice is that the dough gets smoother and silkier with each stretch. You'll also start to see some very cool air bubbles. Watch this. There's one. Popping up as you do more and more. So you're introducing gas to the dough as well as giving a chance for the gluten to build. So I think I did this 5 or 6 times. I'm not even sure. I just kind of do it through much of the afternoon while I'm doing whatever else I'm doing. And you can see the dough gets bigger and stronger as I go. All right, so we are back. This dough looks awesome. I don't know if you can see, there are some little air bubbles here and everywhere else. The whole folding and stretching process has introduced air. The starter has been chewing up more of the yeast and bacteria in the new flour, and all that also creates bubbles and air. And so all that is what gives bread lift. So that's all very exciting. So we are going to take this and shape it into 2 different loaves. And then those loaves are going to actually spend the night in the refrigerator and they'll bake in the morning. So first let's start by doing some shaping. So we get some flour down on our counter here, and then a little on our hands as well. Okay, and now we sort of coax this out. Let's get rid of that. Out of the bowl. can see how jiggly it is. That's a very good sign. We do like a jiggly dough. All right, nice. This looks awesome. So this is my first all white flour sourdough loaf, which seemed to make sense since I had white flour I was dealing with in the starter. All right, that's super cool. So we're just gonna kind of give this a little bit of a turn. Just kind of make it a little bit more dough-like, which is good. Again, lots of jiggly going on, which we really like. All right, and now let's go ahead and make this into our two doughs, or two loaves rather. So these are probably about the same size, so just gonna give them a preliminary shape. Gonna turn them over on themselves. And what we're doing here is, this is gonna be the bottom of the loaf eventually, so just trying to make a little bit of tension on the top of the loaf. So doing that by sort of binding this up this way. And then we'll get a little more flour out. And then flip this over to there. And then that is gonna sit until I do a final shape on it. But I'm gonna give it a little bit of time to relax first. So just more of this. You can see the bubbles coming up, it's super fun. Just kind of binding this up again like a little package. And connecting it in the middle, and then we turn it over, and both of these are then invited to chill for a little bit on the counter, and I'll come back to them in a few minutes for their final shaping. So that'll take about 10 minutes for them to relax, but they look fantastic. So, all right, we'll be back. Poof. All right, while the dough is resting, I'm gonna get the two containers ready that's gonna hold them. So this is a banneton. I think that's French. It's basically this little basket, and it's got a liner in it. You can use it without the liner or with the liner. Without the liner, it creates sort of cool artistic ridges in the bread, which I actually like. So I'm gonna try it without the liner. And I'll use the liner actually for my other container. So we're gonna use this like this to get some cool lines. And I will use rice flour, brown rice flour. So I just made this. I put some brown rice into the blender and made it. And I will tell you, I had been dusting my bannetons with regular flour, thinking rice flour couldn't make that big a difference, but holy mackerel, rice flour is real. Once I got some rice flour to use, my loaves were no longer sticking, which is super dope. So there you go. That's gonna hold one loaf. And then I'm just gonna use this little sort of food storage container thing for my other loaf, and I will use the liner with it, which will be great. So just kind of a made up banneton. So you can really use these anywhere or use anything for these. So same thing. Little rice flour inside, kicking that around. Want to get it all on the sides. I will tell you that it does suck when your dough sticks to your container. So there we go. So those are both ready. We'll be back in a few more minutes. Again, my word for you today, rice flour, not a joke. So we will be back shortly to get these loaves ready to go in those baskets. All right, we are back to do final shaping on these lovely two loaves and to get them ready for their overnight stay. So I think, as I said before, the big job here in this shaping is to build up tension here on the top of the loaf. I will say this part of preparing a sourdough loaf, not my strength. So we're gonna see how it's gonna turn out. Let's take this guy first, this smaller guy. Let's get a little bit of dust. We don't call this dust, we call it flour. On top and on my hands. Let's flip him over. And now we're kind of doing more of what I was doing before, which is this kind of binding this up. Again, with the idea that we're gonna create tension in the loaf. And then we kind of tuck my hand over and drag this back to create more of that tension. Same thing on this side, tuck this under and drag this back to create more of that. That's pretty decent. I'm gonna let that go. And then into the Banneton it goes, in this case, just the basket. Seal up this bottom seam. Remember, this is gonna be the bottom of the loaf tomorrow. So I'm gonna use that to flip it back over when we bake it. A little bit of flour on top just to keep it nice and happy. And now we've got this one, same trick. We'll get some flour on top of this. Dun, 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 dun. Right, good, good. So flip it over, and then I'll flip it over here again, drag it toward us, toward me, I guess, technically. And you can see how it's tightening the top, that top, just by creating more tension, which is what we want. So now we flip that over, cradle it into the Banneton, seal up that bottom. Now this holds, the Banneton holds the rice flour a little less well. So I'm just gonna get a little bit more rice flour on the sides here. Make sure that I don't have any stickage when I roll back around to this tomorrow. This will grow a little bit in the fridge. It's not gonna double in size. It'll fill out a little bit. You'll see that in the morning. Alexa, stop. She had a timer going. A little bit of flour on top. And then these will go into plastic bags because they can tend to dry out if you don't cover them. So there's a plastic bag for that one. Oops, sliding around. And I'll get a plastic bag for the other one. And they will both go into the refrigerator for the night, and we'll be back in the morning and bake them in the oven. And that's how we know it's gonna be good. See you then. All right, good morning. I've got a little coffee going on. Our loaves are coming out of the fridge. So I'll give you a look at those. I earlier said that these go in overnight. Overnight could be anywhere from 8 to 24 hours. And the whole point here is it builds flavor, they tell me. That looks really awesome. Got a little air bubble coming up there, which is super cool. And it's filled out a little bit, you can see. Again, in the refrigerator proof, it's building flavor, getting a little bit of volume, but really not very much. So again, you can see here, it's looking good, and a little air bubble there, which is good news. So these will sit out for about an hour. I'm gonna leave them loosely covered in plastic so they don't dry out. These sit out for about an hour, and then they will go into a 480-degree oven, specifically Dutch oven, that will heat along with the oven. So I'll be back when these are ready to go in the oven. Okay, we're ready to go. My oven has been preheating for about an hour at 480. The Dutch oven is in there, ripping hot, which is what we want. I'm gonna do first the dough that was in the little basket. I'm gonna turn it upside down onto this parchment. I'm gonna score the top of it with a razor blade. That's gonna allow it to rise in an artistic way and also not have a blowout. The big question now is to see whether our rice flour is keeping this from sticking into the basket. So just sort of flop that over. Look at that, beautiful, beautiful. And it's got some extra flour going on, so I'm just gonna brush some of that off. This is the rice flour, which is, it's not gonna, certainly doesn't hurt it, but it doesn't need to be in there. Oh, that looks so good. Okay, so get some of this excess rice flour off, which we want. And then I'm actually gonna add a little bit more of the wheat flour, just to kind of give it a little bit of cool look. We'll kind of rub that in a little bit. And then here's our razor blade scoring action. Just want to draw this all the way across. And that will hopefully give us some artistry when it comes out. All right, so that is ready to go. I will get out the Dutch oven. So again, 480 degrees, that's super hot. So we take the lid off, don't bake that. Let's get rid of some of that rice flour. And in we go. So just kind of make sure that it's not specifically pressing into the dough on the edges. And otherwise that is ready to go. We'll go in for about 20 minutes at 480. And then the lid will come off for another 20 minutes. All right, it's been 20 minutes. Let's see how it looks when I take the lid off of the Dutch oven. See if I can do this without burning myself or anybody else. Poof. All right. All right, we are trying again to see how the bread looks. It's been out of the Dutch oven now for 20 minutes. So let's take a look and see if it's ready to come out. I think it is. There is our bread. Nice. Here it is, loaf number 1, coming out of the Dutch oven, looking kind of perfect. So there's that. Really nice. This is what our scoring did, so you can kind of see where we had the flour. The sourdough people refer to this as the ear, which is perhaps creepy and weird, but whatever. And this needs to cool for, I would say, at least 2 hours before I cut it open. If you cut open bread too soon, it messes up the crumb. It'll be gummy inside. So we're now going to put, I am now going to put the Dutch oven back in the oven and let it warm up for loaf number 2. So it's lost a little bit of its heat. I want it to be super ripping hot as it was the first time around. So in it goes. And we'll give that about 10 minutes to warm up. But there is loaf number 1. We are back with loaf number 2. Going to get the Dutch oven out of the big oven. That is hot at 480 degrees. Just gonna get that out of the way. This is the one that was done inside the little Tupperware container. So that flopped out beautifully, as the other one did. So brush some of that rice flour out of the way. Man, this is a good looking loaf. Okay. All right, and get a little bit of wheat flour on the outside just to kind of get that same contrast on this loaf that we saw on the other ones, because it looks really cool and super awesome. And get my trusty razor blade and cut right across there. And then let's try some decorative cuts in this part, which I've never done before successfully, but we'll try now. All right, this goes, as the other one did, into the Dutch oven. Get the paper out of the way. Lid goes on. You go in the oven. Alexa, set a bread timer for 25 minutes.
Bread timer, 25 minutes, starting now.
And we're on. All right, time for the cover opening reveal on loaf number 2. Little puff of steam when I pulled that open, which is a good sign. There's our loaf. It looks beautiful. It's gonna get about 20 more minutes in the oven, and we'll finish it up. Alexa, set a 20-minute bread timer. I'm gonna get the second loaf. We'll see what it looks like. It looks amazing. Here's loaf number 2. Looking absolutely beautiful. So you can see I got a better sort of, again, ear, what they call this, on loaf number 1 than I did in loaf number 2. I think that has everything to do with how deeply I made the cut on loaf number 2, not quite as deep. So as it rose and expanded, it didn't get that same sort of peel back experience. But my little decorative cuts on the side here did pretty awesome. So there you have it. 2 white sourdough loaves. I'll cut one of them open in a little while, let you see what the inside looks like. All right, moment of truth time. Let's cut one of these bad boys open and see how they look inside. I'm gonna cut this one. It's been out of the oven the longest. Hear that great crackling crust? I should be using a cutting board, probably. cutting easier than it looks like. I'm just trying to do this without slicing up the rack. Holy mackerel. Check that out. There you have it, a beautiful, oh man, I wish you could smell this, a beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. 2 beautiful loaves of sourdough bread, one of which, at least, has got this beautiful open crumb, very soft and moist inside. I'm gonna eat this right now. So there you have it, sourdough. You can do it too. There it was, friends. Sourdough bread, starting with the starter that was given to me by my friend, and made with white bread flour, and done in the Dutch oven and all those other things. So it was a lot of fun. I'm gonna give both of these loaves away. In fact, I give away most of the bread that I bake because I can't eat it all myself. But I'm excited to try this little bit that I cut off. Have fun.